Hey guys, Matt from Eastwood. We're here in my home garage, and today we're going to talk about one of my favorite upgrades for the Eastwood Motorized Bead Roller. Now this is my go-to bead roller that I use every day in my shop, and I like it most because of A, the strength that it has, and B, the pedal that's on it for the speed control. You can actually work it with your foot on the ground, just like a gas pedal of a car. So for me, this is the one I like, and I've added recently the forming die kit for the Eastwood Motorized Bead Roller, and it works really awesome. There's a lot of different things that you can do with it, so I figured I'd go over today what you could do with each of the dies and kind of give you guys a jumping point for you to get some ideas if you get this kit for yourself, what you can do to form metal using your bead roller. So let's get started. Alright, so the forming die kit for the Motorized Bead Roller is very similar as far as the actual die makeup goes. And the functions you can do with it are basically the same. Now the big thing that's different on these that I really like in the forming die kit for the Motorized Bead Roller is these little sleeves here. So these sleeves are very nicely machined to actually go over the whole entire shaft here, so you can actually adjust or slide your dies over top. So you slide each of these sleeves on like so. There's a little collar that's inside of them, or a shoulder, that allows you to just basically slide them on until they stop, and then you use your normal end bolts to tighten them down like this, and tighten these down, and then you can basically snug them up with your Allen wrench here real quick like that. And then you can take your set of dies you're going to use, and they have little scrub screws in them here that allow you to put this on and adjust the offset of them. So I have this opened up as far as it'll go. I'm going to slide it on, and the lower die I like to keep basically on these offset dies, I like to keep them all the way out. And then on the top die, I can change the offset to change the effect of the step in the panel. So I'll just take my Allen wrenches here, find the one that works. And it's got flats that are machined into the sleeves, so you have a nice solid contact point for the grub screw. And I'll just tighten them down and get a nice grab on them. So if I want to just do our standard offset, you can run the die down and basically get it to where they touch. And there's your standard offset that you're going to get for a joggle. If you want to go with a more rounded joggle, you can basically slide it in even a little more, like so, and that's all it takes to change it. And then we can basically tighten it down. A common one I do is I'll run them in like this, and that'll give me a little softer bend, and then we can tighten our grub screw down, and we're basically ready to go. So it's that quick to slide them on and off. You can leave the sleeves on if you're going to be using this die set. You can leave the sleeves set up just like this and slide them off and adjust them on the fly if you need to go to a different part. So now that I got these mounted up, I'm going to show you each of the functions or the type of curves and bends that you can do with each of these dies to give you an idea of all the possibilities of this kit. Okay, so here's the most standard way to use the offset dies for making a joggle in a panel. I have the dies basically tightened down till they're just about touching. I touch them and then I usually back them off just a hair. And then when you feed them in, you can have a preset line for where you want your joggle to be. So if you're doing the edge of a panel here, we can just simply draw a line on our panel, and we can run it through, and that's going to give us a joggle right on that line. So I like to run the line. You can either run it on either one of the dies, but for sight, I will run it a lot of times on the inner die here. So as you feed it through, just follow your line on whatever you have a sight on. Alright, so as you can see, this made a nice crisp joggle or step in the panel here that is exactly like what we saw on the dies there, and that's pretty much the standard way to use this. So there's a couple ways that you can use this. It's really just up to your imagination. So one way that I like to use the joggle bend is if you imagine the bottom of a cowl panel or the bottom style line of earlier cars in the 20s, 30s, 40s. They oftentimes had a little stylized or a bead at the bottom here that then folds under the cowl. So it works really well for something like that where you're trying to give the appearance of something being like pressed in or pressed out. The other great use for this die is if you're doing any lap welds, like if you're doing floor pans or repairs inside a car where you want to lap weld something, it gives you a perfect offset so you can lay another piece of material that's the same thickness over top of it, and it basically sits nice and flat, and you can drill holes into your rosette or spot welds to put everything back together. So it works really well for either of those options, and again, there's no rule to how you can use this die. These are just a couple of ideas that I have. So I'm going to show you one of the other uses for this die where you can make a panel look like it's actually embossed by just setting the die up and running it in the middle of the panel. Okay, so to do an embossed panel, I just drew up a quick shape here on this scrap piece that we can make an area that looks like it's embossed or stamped. So if this was an area that was like a recess in a firewall or something like that, you can make it just like this. So you raise the panel up to the point where you can slip it in. I usually like to start on a straight area. And what you can do is, depending on how you want the offset, you can either line your line up with the top here and follow it there, or you can move it on the inside. If you want it on the inside, you can set it up so you're following the line with your eye on the inside edge of the die. So on this one, I'm going to set it up so that we're on the inside edge of the die. Support the panel, and then you can just crank it down. Depending on the gauge of metal you're using. I'm using 18 here, so we may need to do multiple passes. So what I'll do is tighten it down till we're definitely deflecting the metal, but we won't go all the way down. And then we'll work on following our line around. So by using the pedal, we can change our speed here. So if we want to go a little tighter, and now we're back at the beginning. Go full depth and follow it again one more time. Alright, so you can see I made the panel and it's got an embossed look to it. So this is, like I mentioned, great for an access cover, or if you're doing like replicating a stamping in a firewall, you can do something like this. So you guys can see as I turn it, how it's pushed it out on this side, or it's simply if you want a recess, you flip it over. Now we have a recess, so you can weld this piece in, or if this is an access cover, you could actually cut this piece with the recess out, put it in into a floor pan or something like that. But that's how you can make a stamped panel really quickly with the offset dies, and that is one of my most common uses for this die, is to make an embossed or stamped look using the bead roller. So now that we showed you this one, we're going to move on to showing you the different bead dies. Alright, for this setup here, we have a 3/8 bead that you can create with these two dies, and then we're going to show you a second option you can do by just changing one die. So I have these dies lined up together, and we can run these through and create, basically, I'm going to go over here more in the center, show you guys. You can create just a standard 3/8 bead, and with this heavier material like 18 gauge, I like to do 2 passes. This will give you a nice crisp 3/8 bead in a panel. Let's see there. So now if all we want to do is just switch this upper die here, we can raise it up, loosen the set screw, pull that one off, and then we can go to our tipping die and we can slide that one on, slide it over even further onto our flat area here, and now we can use the thin tipping die on this flat section here to do a tip. So same die, and we can create a nice tip in a panel that will give us a pretty sharp edge there. So we can go up and tip a little bit more. But you can run it through and pull up and get more of a tip. And if you want to get even further tip, you could flip these dies around and put the flat more towards the outside, and we can get even closer to a 90 tip. But you can see how quick and easy, just by sliding one die off and sliding one on, you can get a nice tip. Now if you want to get a softer edge than what's right here by using this hard lower die, what we can do is now again change one die, so we can raise this up. Loosen these grub screws here. Free this lower one up, slide it off, take this poly lower wheel and press it on like so. Alright, and then if we want to just simply move this die out to get it further to the edge for making it easier to tip, just loosen the little grub screw, move it out a little bit, get us there, and tighten the screw back up, and we're ready to tip an edge. So a little trick for tipping an edge with the soft lower wheel is you can tighten the wheel down until it actually digs into the lower wheel a little bit. Because the lower wheel has some deflection, it will actually make a little softer of a bend, and you can actually push the lower die in and just feed it through, and you don't have to pull up like with the harder, with the solid lower die. So we can just push it through and run it like we would a normal bead, and it will give a little softer of a bend, and you don't have to actually pull up on it. Now if we want to go a little further, we can do that by just keeping the die the same, running it through and just pulling up harder. That gives us a nice rounded looking broken edge there, which I prefer on a lot of stuff. But if you want a hard edge, you can go with the solid lower die that will give you more of a edge that's kind of like using a brake, whereas this will give you a softer bent edge, which is a little better for some projects, especially on the exterior of a car where you want a soft bent edge. So we can keep going up to 90 with this just by simply pulling harder. So now we can actually keep the lower soft polyurethane die on, and we can swap over to just changing the upper die. So again, we just loosened up the set screws, slid the other die off. We now have this die here that is the round tipping die. So this is again for tipping an edge, but you can get a much softer radius by doing this. So we'll put the set screw in, and we'll show you guys bending the metal with that. You can see you can do a real nice soft bend, and if you want to make this bend actually go further and be a larger radius, you can simply move in just a little bit from where we just were and roll it through again. Again, pulling up. And we can keep that bend going as we go. You can see you get a nice, real soft radius there that is really nice. So if you don't have a slip roll, or you don't have a way with like a radius brake to make something like this, you can do it simply with this die and the soft lower wheel. So if you want an exact radius, there's a couple of dies that you can use here. We have both a 1/2 inch and a 3/8 tipping die. We showed you the 3/8 earlier with using the 180 lower that fits that to just make a normal bead, but you can also use these with the soft lower wheel to create a radius that matches either a 1/2 inch or a 3/8. So we're going to start with the 3/8, and again we're going to keep the lower wheel on, slip this on here, tighten our grub screw down, and we can take our piece of metal and we'll show you. Again, we're gonna press into the lower wheel just a little bit, feed it in and pull up just a little bit as we go. And we're going to be bending around that lower die, so it's going to give us a 3/8 radius. I can go a little further. see we have a 3/8 radius there. So if we want to change to a 1/2 inch, it's as simple as loosening the die, or raising it up rather. Loosen this grub screw, slide it off, slide this one right on. And we're ready to go. Tighten it back down. Press it into the lower die a little bit. There you can see we have a 1/2 inch radius, not quite as tight as the 3/8 that we did earlier. We now have a 1/2 inch, so it'll give you a little more gradual or softer of a bend there. So that is the way you can go between three different upper dies. You can change and go from a really soft radius to the 1/2 inch down to a 3/8 to get a really nice sharp radius. Okay, so if we want to put a 45-degree bend on a panel and you want it to be pretty much exactly a 45, you can use this die right here that has that 45 machined into it. You can see there. And we put that on our lower. Spin this around so I can see my grub screw. And then we use this upper sharp tipping die that we will use on the other side, on the top, and we can set that in there so it's just in the recess, like that. While everything's still loose, I'll set that up there. And then tighten it down, and then we can tighten everything up with it, tighten our grub screws up, and we're ready to make a 45-degree bend in the edge of our panel. Alright, so now we have the dies installed. I'll show you doing a 45 joggle bend with this die set. So I have it tightened down pretty much so the dies are just touching, and we'll run this in like this. You can preset a line wherever you want to follow, where you want the value of your joggle to be. But we can run it through, get it started, and then just hold up on the outside end. So this is with the dies as tight as I can go. That's going to give you a 45 joggle there. So now if we want to change the 45 joggle and draw out the joggle just a little bit, we can simply loosen upper die up with the grub screw, and we can slide it out and slide the spacing out a little bit. And what that'll do is it will still give us a 45, but it will draw out the actual 45 will get drawn out further because of the way that we're putting it through. So put it back down so it's just touching, and we'll actually run it right through here. Show you guys next to each other. So get it started. I just hold up. And there you can see the differences just by moving it over. So you can change the effect of the 45 joggle in the panel by just moving the upper die, sliding it on that sleeve just a little bit. So there's no end to the offset you can do here to get this drawn out even further, but that's a quick example. So our last most common die set combination here is this lower edge forming die, and I put it together with the knife edge or thin tipping die for the top. And the way I like to use this is it has this shoulder here that you can use as a guide for an edge of a panel. So I tighten this down, and you're going to be able to run it right against like that. So I tighten this down. I have everything already pretty much adjusted, and I tighten it down so that the tipping edge die is pretty much bottomed out in the resets here. What that does is it forces the panel in and gives you a very, very tight little joggle bend that's good for forming a lower edge, and is, with having that shoulder here, we're able to keep it tight against the edge of the panel, and we know that it will follow exactly how we want it to along the edge. So you can see that created a very tight versus some of these 45s up here. You can see it created a very sharp, quick step in a panel that is good and can be good for doing a lap weld, or can be for a style line on the outside of a car, depending on what you're doing. But that is a quick way to do that by using that guide. It makes it super simple. As long as you cut your edge straight or at the angle that you want, you can just follow right along with it, and it will create that nice crisp bend. If you want to trim this edge down here a little bit, because maybe it's too long because of the way the die is, you can simply describe it, trim it down, but it'll give you that nice edge that's going to be the same every single time because of the offset of the die. So that was some of my favorite and most common combinations of the die sets in the forming die kit to make all of the different patch panels and custom metalwork that I do day to day in my shop on all of my projects. With a little bit of practice and some proper planning and a couple of other Eastwood tools, you can make custom dashboards, patch panels, hauling tire panels for sides of cars, just with doing a little bit of practice and using your imagination. Hopefully this video got you guys going and gave you some ideas for what you can do with your motorized bead roller and the forming die kit. If you want to learn more about any of these tools, you can click the link down below, or you can visit eastwood.com to get all the tools you need to do the job right. Thanks guys, catch you later.